This is NBC 10 at Issue.
NBC 10 at Issue, Sunday, January 31st, 2010. Is he the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania? Republican former Congressman Pat Toomey leads in head-to-head matchups with Arlen Specter and Joe Sestak. What's his take on President Obama now? What would he do about the economy and health care? Pat Toomey, now on NBC 10 at Issue. Good morning. I'm Steve Highsmith. Pat Toomey served 3 terms in Congress representing the 15th District, mostly the Lehigh Valley. He went on to head the Club for Growth and now is formally seeking the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate and the opportunity to face either Democrat Joe Sestak or Arlen Specter in November. And with me now is Pat Toomey.
Hi, Steve.
Nice seeing you.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Let's get right to how your campaign is doing. The Franklin and Marshall Daily News poll came out this past week and said it's basically yours to lose.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Gosh.
Well, you're up by 14 points on the closest candidate.
Well, that appears to be the case, I suppose, and certainly I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's encouraging. But I don't put too much stock in polls 9 months before an election. We've got a long way to go. I'm going to run like I'm 20 points behind. I think that's what I ought to do.
Well, the same poll does say that about half the people surveyed say they don't know enough about you to make a decision about you. Do you have a concern about that, given that as much money as you've been able to raise so far, Arlen Specter still has a lot more?
Well, Arlen Specter does have a lot more, but Arlen Specter is, I think, quite likely to spend a lot of that money trying to get through a primary, and I don't know that he'll manage to get through that primary. I think Joe Sestak has a very good chance of winning that, but our fundraising is going extremely well. I think it'll continue to go well, and I think we'll have more than enough money to get our message out. Keep in mind, the fundraising is going extremely well, but we haven't been spending it on getting a message out to voters, so I'm not surprised that a lot of folks are not familiar with me yet. They'll get a chance.
Do you plan to spend a lot in April and May, or are you going to save everything for after?
Really haven't decided yet. We'll wait and see.
What do you make of the Scott Brown victory in Massachusetts?
You know, I think it's indicative of what we're seeing, really a national trend, and it's reflective of the same kind of message I'm hearing across Pennsylvania every single day, which is people saying, Washington doesn't get it. These guys are out of control. They're not listening to us, and they're pursuing an agenda that the American people never signed up for. When you think about serial bailouts of failing companies, nationalizing whole industries, spending on a breathtaking scale, deficits like we've never seen before, and then they want to take over health care. By the way, they still want to do cap and trade and card checking. And a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, shouldn't you just be focused on growing the economy, creating jobs, and keeping us safe? Well, I think that should be the focus, and because it hasn't been to date, I think people are reacting to that.
Would it be a mistake for Republicans to think that the Scott Brown victory signals that what the American people are endorsing is the Republican Party?
That would be a mistake. I don't think that the people are saying we want to demonstrate an endorsement of the Republican Party per se. I think they're looking for ideas and principles. That's much more important than a party label. And the ideas are going to be those that are going to generate economic growth and sustain security and reform health care in sensible ways. So I think we do need to be a party of ideas, but most importantly, individual candidates need to articulate principles.
Follow up on what you said here a little bit earlier, and that was that people didn't vote for this. In 2006, they said no to Republicans in Congress.
Right.
In 2008, they pretty strongly said they want President Obama. And if you were paying attention to what Barack Obama was saying as a candidate, what you're getting this past year is pretty much the kind of government he said he was going to give.
I would have to disagree with part of that. I agree that voters rejected Republicans who were in control of Congress, and I think part of the reason that they did that was too many Republicans in Congress had abandoned the principles that had gotten them there. I criticized many of my Republican colleagues when I was in the House prior to that. I thought we were spending too much money. I thought the earmark explosion was obscene. We had Republican members of Congress going to jail for corruption. So, you know, that's appalling, and I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that the voters decided, hey, you know, this is no way to be a majority party. As for the election of President Obama, you know, I really don't think people were expecting that they were buying into an extremely ambitious program to really remake our economy, which with a much bigger role for government, much higher spending, you know, nationalizing whole industries. They were voting for a guy who was a very charismatic figure, very intelligent, very eloquent, charismatic, and he promised change, and in a time when a lot of people were really tired with the previous administration.
So you think people didn't really know what change they wanted?
I think they didn't know what change they were going to have coming down the pike. I don't think they anticipated that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid were going to write the kind of health care bills they did. I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams imagined that we'd have the combination of $1 trillion of spending of money we don't have, all kinds of mandates, taxes, and then those really unconscionable deals that were struck to buy votes of the senator from Louisiana and the senator from Nebraska. No, I don't think people had any expectation that they'd see a product or a process that was that out of line.
The president was correct, though, wasn't he, when he said that he inherited a lot of this mess? I mean, except he will say there's $1 trillion in deficit that he's added, but that there was, 12, 13 trillion before that,
well,
or maybe 10 to 12 before that, and he's right on that, isn't he? I mean, the recession started before he took office.
The president inherited a very, very difficult situation, very difficult set of circumstances, but I have to say, I think many of his policies are making things worse.
Well, let me stop you right there. I understand that, and you can feel free to follow up. But my context is, we just got a report, for example, this week that said that gross domestic product went up 5.7% in the fourth quarter, the first time, well, the highest rate since 2003.
Right.
You take a snapshot of that, the first reaction might be, well, that's a good thing. The economy's showing signs of really rebounding. Maybe some things are turning around.
Well, certainly it's a good thing to have growth. The number was in the right direction, and it was a pretty good magnitude, but it's still pretty modest compared to what you would normally expect after the decline we've had. Remember, we're coming off the worst economic contraction in many decades. Normally, after any recession, you get a pretty strong bounce back. We're not seeing that. Now, this is the most hopeful sign, but it's only one indicator, and frankly, so many of the others are looking pretty grim that I don't think we should be too confident that we're out of the woods yet.
If the Stimulus or Recovery Act had been on your watch, you would have voted against it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that was very ill-conceived.
And so you don't buy at all the argument that the financial system was so broken, so log-jammed, so there was no money flowing, that money had to be injected into the system. The Fed had to do it, had to do, and everybody else.
We got a couple of things going on at the same time here. The stimulus was a big spending program, a big effort to just grow government and spend money as though we're going to spend our way out of the recession. I think that was very ill-conceived. Remember, all that money has to come from the productive private sector, whether it's borrowed away or taxed away, and so I'm not surprised that that was not a constructive boost for the economy. Now, during the financial crisis that was melting down a little over a year ago, I think the federal government did some things that were prudent. I think it made sense for the Fed, for instance, to open the discount window to the broker-dealers, to provide liquidity to essentially solvent firms, but those that might be running into a liquidity problem. I thought it made sense to increase the FDIC guarantee, for instance, to prevent a run on banks. I think it made sense for the Fed to accept a lower quality collateral when it provided the liquidity. So some of these measures, I think, did make sense under the circumstances. But the forced bailouts, the forced investments of taxpayer money into banks, big banks, whether they wanted it or not, I think many of those were ill-conceived.
I want to ask you about Ben Bernanke and others coming up in a moment. More with Senate candidate Pat Toomey when NBC 10 at Issue comes right back. Stay tuned.